Welcome to the second part of my thoughts on Kingdom Hearts 3. In the last part I just talked about the game in general, mostly its battle system and gameplay. This time I'll be covering all of the Disney world, and I'll be giving each one a rating out of 5. In 4 categories: music, story, gameplay, and boss fights. I'd like to stress, I'm not really a professional game reviewer. I'm not picking apart every tiny little detail of these worlds. This is just my opinion, based on my first playthrough of the game. Just some general impressions. This video will contain spoilers for the stories of each Disney world, but it won't contain any spoilers for the main storyline of the game. So let's start off with Olympus. But technically it's not a Kingdom Hearts 3 world, it's a Kingdom Hearts 2.9 world. I'm still counting it. This world was a great way to kick off the game. The feeling you get from seeing the title card say not Olympus Coliseum, but simply Olympus, was awesome. And I'm biased because Hercules is my favourite 2D animated Disney film, but anyway. For music, I give Olympus a 3 out of 5. Its music is solid, and I like that they're finally putting in new themes that aren't just the original Olympus Coliseum song. But a lot of it did feel like generic heroic / generic mountain music to me. It was nice once you finally got to the Realm of the Gods and heard that remix of the original Olympus Coliseum field theme and battle theme though. And speaking of nods to earlier games, did anyone pick up on the fact that during that one cutscene where Hades summons the Titans, there's a remix of the Underworld battle theme from Kingdom Hearts 2 playing? That's sadly the only time you get to hear that song in 3, but it's still a nice touch. For story, I give this world a 5 out of 5. It's not perfect, but I like the fact they actually give Sora a reason to visit this world. They tie in Sora losing his powers to finding Hercules, who also lost and regained his powers at some point. We finally get to see Thebes and regular citizens of Thebes. And after all these years, they finally adapted the ending of Hercules. Which is a little weird because earlier games did imply they were set after the events of the film, but here they adapt the end of the film anyway. In fact, they took some dialogue directly from the film. Still, adapting the ending of the film is points for me because again, Hercules is one of my favourite Disney films, and the Titans are insanely cool. More on that later. For gameplay, I give this world a 4 out of 5. It was pretty good overall, and Olympus has a lot of nooks and crannies to explore, and the Realm of the Gods is insanely fun to move around in. It looks really cool, has lots of different areas to it, has a lot of grind rails, and shows off some of the new mechanics quite well. And they introduce a good variety of enemies to let you experiment with which game mechanics are good against which ones. The main reason this world loses a point is the sledding minigames during the Thebes Under Siege segments, which I felt had terrible controls. Hitting walls not only kills your momentum, it makes your directional controls go all over the place, and the camera isn't that great in some of these segments either. The other reason this world loses a point is because I feel like Olympus itself is a little bit too complicated of an area to be throwing you into with only your base abilities. When I came back to explore Olympus after having double jump and glide, it was a lot more fun, but at the very start of the game with how limited Sora is in his movement options, it felt overwhelming and a little bit confusing. The Realm of the Gods didn't suffer this problem, but Olympus, like I said before, is a very layered area with a lot of nooks and crannies, so the map doesn't help much, and without a lot of good movement abilities, it can be hard to navigate. And again, this is only a problem because it's the first world of the game when you don't have access to better movement options. For the boss fight, I give Olympus a 3 out of 5. Now that's purely based on my first impression, and if I replayed the fights, I'd probably end up giving it a 4. Most of this score comes from the Rock Titan. The Rock Titan was shown off in demos for a reason. It's a really cinematic looking fight, but it's also quite fun as well. The one downside is Goofy constantly saying, "Look out!" But then there's the end boss of the world. They throw the ice and lava titans at you at the same time, and that fight was one that I was a little confused about at first and took me a while to fully figure out. Again, it doesn't help that Sora is very limited in what he can do at this point in the game, and I'm embarrassed to say it took me until the very end of the fight to realise you could parkour off of the magma Zeus is trapped in. which made hitting the Titans pretty awkward. And then there's the Wind Titan. This battle had a lot to live up to because when I was a kid, I thought the Wind Titan in the Hercules movie was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. Always my favourite of the 4 Titans, and I always look forward to that part of the movie. The way they animated it in this game made it look kind of silly and just not nearly as cool as in the movie, but then again it's been a little while since I watched the film. The fight itself, when I first played this, I was kind of awkwardly bumbling around all over the place. I never fully understood what the game expected of you in this one. I'll need to replay the game and see if I do better at this fight now that I understand the game mechanics more. Because at the time, the fight felt poorly designed and not very enjoyable, but again, that could just be because I wasn't really understanding what the game expected of me. So, first impressions are a 3 out of 5, I'll replay these fights on my own time, and I might consider them a 4 after I do so. So, skipping Twilight Town, because it's an original world and I'm not reading those, next up is Toy Box. This is a world many people have been hotly anticipating, and I pretty much grew up with Toy Story, so I had a feeling this world would be a favourite of mine. So to start with, music. 5 out of 5. Yeah, this remix of You've Got a Friend in Me gets stuck in your head a lot, but it's just so good. It adds so much charm and personality to the world. I love they managed to fit one of the songs from the film into the soundtrack, and I love revisiting this world just to hear the song, and that's definitely grounds for a 5 out of 5 to me. Story, 4 out of 5. Now, there's only one reason this does not get a 5, and that's that I feel this world's plot overstayed its welcome a little bit. The core concept is great, and I love how they integrated the whole toys coming to life thing with the concept of hearts. The Toy Story characters get some pretty good lines with Sora and young Xehanort. I love the hilarity of Rex thinking Sora is from a video game, though, okay, slight missed opportunity here, the intro cutscene to the world. You've got that huge flashy scene that's a parody of trailers for Final Fantasy Versus 13, I think. I didn't really follow that game's development all that much, so I don't get all the references. But it's sort of a parody of Nomura-directed games in general, but I really wish this scene ended with Yozora getting anticlimactically killed, and it's showing a game over screen, and then cut to Rex screaming. That would have been amazing. Anyway, the design of a lot of elements looks straight out of the films. In fact, some of the Pixar staff even worked on the development of the world, which is amazing. My main issue is that the scene at the game store should have been the climax of that world. And instead, it just goes on for another 30 minutes. Now, in hindsight, this was one of my favourite worlds to play, so it going on for another 30 minutes was not a bad thing, but it did feel like awkward pacing, as the highest point of dramatic tension in the world's storyline wasn't the end of it. I also wish Woody had more of a direct hand in freeing Buzz from his brainwashing. And also, the world tended to repeat the plot of, oh no, we've lost someone, let's look for them, and that happens about 3 separate times. So for those reasons, it doesn't get a 5 out of 5 for story, but still pretty solid. Gameplay? I give this world a 5 out of 5 looking back. Galaxy Toys is a really fun and well-designed area to explore. I like how they took the concept of a toy store and made a really interesting video game level out of it. And while this doesn't pertain to gameplay, there are so many cool Easter eggs hidden everywhere. And they recreated nearly all the posters in Andy's room perfectly. There's just so much awesome attention to detail in this world. I guess the one gripe I have with the gameplay is that Gigasses take a bit too long to kill for that early in the game. Heck, I've come back to that world in the post-game and it still takes me forever to kill them. And they show up in random encounters pretty often as well. Boss fight. Now, this is the one thing that drags the world down for me. I've given this world only a 2 out of 5 for the boss fight, and that mostly comes from the end boss being very disappointing. I don't mind that it's not an actual Toy Story character, but it just felt really bland overall, just a big, flying, heartless car thing. The concept of the arena was pretty cool, having all of the blocks and buildings get rearranged. And it has some kinda cool attacks, but overall this was one of the least memorable end bosses to me. I'd actually known about Angelic Amber before I played the game, and I honestly wish she was the end boss of the world. She had a really unique design, and there was a lot of potential there, but no, she was just a mini-boss. I also really like the earlier mini-bosses, those big dinosaur things. Just the way they move like they're actually jointed toys, that was really cool looking. So those two mini-bosses were good, and that one mini-boss against the UFO was also quite nice, but the overall boss fight score of this world is dragged down by the King of Toys, I think it's called? Yeah, I can't even remember its name, being a very bland and underwhelming boss, at least to me. Next we have the Kingdom of Coronel, whatever you call it, the Tangled World, basically. For music, I give this world a 1 out of 5, and it's the only world to get a 1 out of 5 for music. It really just felt like generic fairy tale music to me. Most Kingdom Hearts games, the music from each world gets stuck in my head. They're all so memorable, and I always enjoy hearing them on future playthroughs or just when I go back to re-explore the world. Here, I totally forgot about the Kingdom of Coronel music. There were so many great songs in the film they could have taken the melodies of, and they just didn't here. Unless they did, and I'm just not realizing it. Just now I realised something. It really could have been an instrumental version of When Will My Life Begin. That would have worked so well. The battle theme too I just found pretty unmemorable. I did like that they changed the music in the marshlands, but then the marshlands only turned out to be one area, so that was kind of a waste. Story. I give this world for story a 2 out of 5. This is one of the few worlds in the game that directly adapts the plot of its film. And for the most part, it does a pretty good job of being an abridged version of Tangled. The problem is, it cuts out a few scenes that take away from the story a lot by their absence. The first, cutting the scene in the mines. By losing this scene, Rapunzel starts calling Flynn Eugene out of nowhere, starting with the halfway point of the world, and we don't get an explanation until the very end. Also, this scene is where Eugene finds out about her hair's magical properties, which means his actions in the very last scene where he gets stabbed have no context for them in this game. And the song she sings to heal him comes completely out of nowhere. I wouldn't be so bothered by this if it weren't for the fact that you can see the mine from the film in the background of this world at certain points. Why are they animated into the background if they weren't going to have you actually go there? Secondly, there's the removal of the Stabbington brothers. Now, conceptually, I like replacing them with Marluxia and his nobodies. The problem is, the Stabbington brothers were a big part of Flynn's motivation. And getting rid of them, one, it makes the whole Tiara subplot pretty much pointless and kind of nonsensical because the scene at the lake plays out the same way it does in the film, even though there's no context for why him leaving with the crown would be so devastating to Rapunzel. But also, losing them means Flynn/Eugene loses his entire character arc of starting out as a roguish thief and gradually developing into a decent human being. In this version, Flynn's just kind of a nice guy from the beginning, which makes him much less interesting as a character. One other thing, and this isn't so much an actual story problem, it was more just something that I found hilarious. Gothel still says quick before they come to in this version, even though instead of knocking 2 people out with that branch, she disintegrated 2 Reaper nobodies. I don't think they're coming to anytime soon. The only reason I'm giving this world a 2 out of 5 for story and not a 1 is that it adapts some of the funniest scenes and lines from the film, as well as letting you actually fight Mother Gothel, in a sense. Gameplay. I originally gave this world a 5, but looking back, I decided to give it a 4. It's a pretty decent world, though it is a very straight linear path from the tower to the castle. Admittedly, that kind of follows the plot structure of the film, but they could have done a little bit more with it. I do like that the town has an entire optional dock area that you never have to go to for the purpose of the story. That was fun to discover when I came back to the world. But overall, this is a very good, solid world. I just don't quite give it a 5 like some of the others. Boss fight though, that gets a 5 out of 5. I'm actually okay with them turning Gothel into a Heartless for the boss fight, because let's be honest, she's not really a combatant. Her main threat in the film comes from emotional manipulation, and the only time she ever was a physical threat to someone was in sneak attacks. Having her suffer the same death she did in the film, but then having her heart turn into the boss of the world was a nice touch. And I love how the Grim Guardianess has a lot of symbolism of Gothel's personality and traits in its various attacks. It wasn't a particularly difficult fight, but it did combine the giant heartless boss with Disney villain boss tropes from the series in a way that I felt made sense and was very enjoyable. Next up, we have the second Pixar world, Monstropolis. For music, I give this a 3 out of 5. Nothing spectacular or really memorable, but all of the music felt very in character with the film, and it had several different songs to fit the mood of the different areas you go through. Story, I give this world a 4 out of 5. For a post-film storyline, it was quite good, and I like the use of Vanitas here, although him coming back was kind of an arsepull, since it sort of invalidates the whole point of Ven's sacrifice and Birth by Sleep. But having the unversed as the enemies fits with Monsters, Inc.'s main theme of emotions. Mike and Sully had some good moments here. I actually think the two of them are some of the best voiced Disney characters in this game, even though they're not their original voices. And the world felt kind of unique in that it made a lot of callbacks to the film that people who watched it would get, while not directly adapting the film's plot. Also, the whole sequence where you go through the factory with Randall constantly throwing traps at you, that felt like something out of Portal, or even a horror movie, which made him one of the most hateable villains in this game, though it's invalidated by something, and I'll get to that later, and that's the main reason this world doesn't get a 5 out of 5 for story. For gameplay, 3 out of 5. A lot of the areas didn't really feel all that fun to explore. You were mostly funneled down one path, and there wasn't really that much to do inside the factory. The final area where everything was on fire was pretty cool, but again, it was mostly just a straight shot to the end. This world wasn't bad, but it definitely wasn't that memorable to me, from a gameplay standpoint at least. And speaking of not memorable, oh boy, for boss fight, Monstropolis gets a 1 out of 5. Some people might disagree with that, and yeah, the boss was kind of thematic, and it was kind of a cool fight, but why didn't you get to fight Randall? There are so many reasons why I'm angry at this. One, they have precedence for having a boss fight against him. He very easily could have been a souped up stealth sneak. Two, this is one of the few times the Disney villain is actually there, an established physical threat, but not fought at all. And three, Randall is so hateable in this world. He put you through an almost Saw-like series of death traps, knowing that you have Boo with you. All the while, he taunts you over the PA system like GLaDOS. He explicitly says that he wants you all to die, including a toddler. Getting to beat him up at the end of all that would have been so satisfying, but no, you just don't. If you actually did, I probably would have rated this world a lot more highly, but as it stands, this world was only okay to me. Next up is the world that nobody is surprised was in this game, Arendelle. So, music. I give Arendelle a 5 out of 5. This is how I describe the field theme for Arendelle. I am not the biggest Frozen fan in the world. I don't hate the film, but I do think Tangled was far better. However, this song makes me feel like a Frozen fan, if that makes sense. I just love what they did with this song. It actually is kind of characterful to the movie, unlike the generic fairy tale music of Corona. It's both joyful and has that mysterious magical quality to it as well. I really couldn't get enough of this song. For story, I give Arendelle a 2 out of 5, a borderline 1. It's kind of a 1.5. So the story of this world can be basically summed up as Sora, Donald, and Goofy climb a mountain while the plot of Frozen happens in the background. Despite being a direct adaptation, almost the entire film happens off-screen. And in some ways, it's a bit of a waste getting all the original voice actors back because so many of them barely say anything. And this results in something that I found very weird about this world's story. Despite the fact that he barely gets to know them at all, Sora still treats Anna, Elsa, and Kristoff like his bestest friends forever, like he treats every other Disney World character. That point where he said, "We have to help them, they're our friends," my first thought was, dude, you knew them for about 5 minutes. I know Sora makes friends quickly, but that's ridiculous even for him. Speaking of those 5 minutes, there's one moment that I felt was really awkwardly handled. Anna's flashback to her childhood. I was okay that they played Do You Want to Build a Snowman over that, because that song does a pretty good job of explaining Anna and Elsa's relationship as children. What I was not okay with was the fact that present-day Anna started giving exposition while the lyrical portion of Do You Want to Build a Snowman was still playing. Oh, my ears. That was so grating. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. Also, speaking of characters who barely do anything, Hans doesn't even talk at all in this world, something that many people have joked about. Wait a minute. A complete afterthought who only exists so the story has a villain? Kingdom Hearts 3 adapted Hans perfectly! So, I was always looking forward to when Frozen inevitably ended up in Kingdom Hearts, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of the movie. Namely because I was hoping an adaptation in Kingdom Hearts would give Hans more screen time and development as a villain, so he didn't feel like a total afterthought. And then it turns out Kingdom Hearts made him even more of an afterthought, but the thing is, I actually am kind of okay with it because at least he got a boss fight. I'll go into that later. Now, the only reason this world does not get a 1 out of 5 for story is for the sheer audacity of having Sora, Donald, and Goofy walk in while Let It Go is happening. That was equal parts hilarious and awesome. I can't believe they actually did that, so an extra point for that alone. For gameplay, Arendelle gets a 3 out of 5. There's a decent amount to explore within the world, but everything is just one big snowy mountain with not a lot of variety, and it's also very easy to confuse the areas, because every time you get thrown down the mountain again, you arrive at a completely different save point, and once you finally go back to the world and start exploring it after you finish it the first time, it's really hard to know how all the areas are interconnected, because your first visit is so disjointed. If that makes any sense. At least the sledding minigame was a lot more fun and well designed than the ones in Olympus. And speaking of minigames, obligatory mention of the Olaf minigame that everyone hates. I also hated it at first, but once you find Olaf's head, Donald and Goofy stop giving their annoying remarks about, "That sounds like Olaf, I wonder where he is." And, I don't know, I was stuck on that for a while, but I didn't end up hating it as much as I thought I would. Mostly because I felt Olaf, a lot of the returning voice actors in this game actually don't sound that good in my opinion, but Josh Gad as Olaf still sounded really good in this one. Hold it, slight addendum here. Since recording this, I've actually gone back and replayed Arendelle to get everything. And when I did, I found out that if you go back to the area where the put Olaf back together minigame first occurred, the minigame starts up again. You do get an item out of completing it, but it seems like the developers seriously thought players would like this minigame so much they wanted to do it again. I guess it's there if you missed some of the dialogue the first time you did it, but yeah, most people would never want to go through this again. Also, Frozen Slider. Getting the 10 treasures for the Orichalcum Plus is a lot more annoying than I expected it to be, especially since the treasures are spaced out to the point where it's very hard to pick up more than one per attempt. So you end up having to do the game 10 times in a row. Looking it up online, I've seen some very colourful language, shall we say, used to describe this game. I didn't personally hate it that much, but it is annoying, and for that and the repeated Olaf minigame, I'm actually docking this world 1 point for gameplay. It's down to a 2 out of 5 now. And for boss fights, a lot of people are going to kill me because I'm not giving this a 5 out of 5, because this is many people's favourite boss. I give the boss fight a 4 out of 5, but here's the thing. I only rated this because I don't think I fully understand the fight yet. There's a lot going on here, and in particular, that giant sun attack, I don't fully understand how to stop it. I just had the reaction command show up after I mashed buttons and killed a few enemies. This is a fight that a lot of people really enjoy, and I've kept a save file before it, so I might want to go back and play around with it to see if I enjoy this fight more, understanding it a bit better. But my first time playing the fight, I didn't fully get what the game expected of you. One side note though, it felt so cathartic to get the final blow with Blizzard. I just felt like that had to happen. Before we move on to the final two worlds, let's cover 100 Acre Wood quickly, because it's technically still a Disney world. Music, 4 out of 5. The rearrangement of the Winnie the Pooh theme is pretty nice overall, and I really like the remix of the minigame theme too. There are also a couple of other remix themes that play during cutscenes in that world. Story, 3 out of 5. It's fairly short, but I felt pretty sad when Winnie the Pooh had forgotten about Sora. And it's kind of implied that as Sora grows up, his connection to Pooh will get weaker. For examining those concepts, it at least gets a 3 out of 5 to me. Gameplay, 2 out of 5. This world only consists of 3 variations on the same minigame, and it's one of those matching quote-unquote puzzle games that seems to be quite popular in Japan, but I'm pretty bad at them. They're not bad minigames, but there could have been more variety, and the whole world can be very easily finished in one sitting. So, on to the Caribbean. Firstly, music. 3 out of 5. The songs here are decent, and the battle theme in particular is good. In fact, it's used for a lot of the trailers. The only reason this is only a 3 out of 5 is because He's a Pirate isn't in this game for some reason. Could they not get the rights to it or something? Story, also 3 out of 5. This one I find a bit weird to rate. Like Arendelle, the majority of the film's plot happens off-screen. However, I always felt that Pirates of the Caribbean 3's plot was awful, so skipping the majority of it is a good thing to me. I've heard that it's a bit more highly regarded by some fans, but I agree with critics. I think 3 is the worst Pirates of the Caribbean film by far. However, there are a lot of elements of it that work better in a game than in a movie in my opinion, particularly the fight at the end, but I'll get to that later. I like that original element they added to the plot of giving Sora his own ethereal ship and having him helped by Tia Dalma all along. And all the actually good parts of the film happen to be the few parts we did get to see in the game, so that's a plus too. I'm actually okay that they skipped the second film. I was always wondering how a Kingdom Hearts game would adapt a film that ends on a cliffhanger, and I guess the answer is don't adapt it at all. And it works surprisingly well, since almost every plot point in the second film was just setting up something in 3 anyway. Gameplay, you're probably not surprised here, 5 out of 5. People have described this as a mini Assassin's Creed Black Flag. I never played that game, but the ship combat I found really enjoyable, sailing to different islands, charting them out. Even looking around for crabs I didn't find nearly as much of a chore as I thought I would. In fact, I managed to get the Leviathan to level 9 before the end boss of the world, on my first visit. I like that the characters do give you an opportunity to explore the world. They emphasize how if they head to the final battle without preparing their ship, they'll just be getting in the way. There are also some pretty cool ship fights against Luxord, apparently that's how his name is pronounced. A lot of your special moves are incredibly overpowered, like the fire cannon attack just shreds enemy ships' health bars, but it's still really fun to play around with. For boss fight, I give this a 4 out of 5. Finally, we actually get to fight a Disney villain directly. Not only that, but in this universe, the Kraken didn't die, so we have to fight it alongside Davy Jones. It has all the cinematic feel of the film's final battle, combined with being very fun to play. Like I said before, there are some elements of the third Pirates film I feel work better in a video game than they do in a movie. The reason this only gets a 4 though, is because Davy Jones himself was kind of pathetic. I don't know if anyone else experienced this, but I found he rarely attacked me at all. So the entire fight was just wail on the tiny tentacle man. Oh, one other thing about the world's story that I don't know how many people feel the same way as me, but I felt the need to point this out. So Cutler Beckett's death happens the exact same way it does in the film. But it feels kind of awkward in this situation, because the pirates pretty much eviscerate his ship and its crew without really giving him a chance to fight back. And while that worked in the movie where the pirates were all anti-heroes, it feels a bit weird that the hyper-idealistic Sora would approve of something like that. A more anti-heroic character like Riku, Terra, or even Aqua, I can see that. But Sora? I don't really see him being on board, no pun intended, with what they did there. So, last but certainly not least, we have San Fransokyo. Music, 5 out of 5. This was definitely not the music I was expecting for this world, but it's such a cool song to listen to. I'm specifically referring to the day version of the song. The night one's okay, but the day one just has this great, almost melancholy atmosphere to it, which fits the tone of the film, and it does get that feeling of a city at sunset across. It also has this feeling of finality to it, which really fits as San Fransokyo tends to be the last world you go to before the end of the game. Story, also 5 out of 5. I love the way we get to see for once Sora actually training the Disney characters to fight back against the Heartless. And not only that, in that cutscene where they all take inspiration from Sora's moves, everything Sora does in that scene is something he can do in gameplay. And they're all things that you, the player, have likely been doing for the whole game. Fred's dialogue is still as hilarious as ever. Most of the characters are pretty well voice acted, though I did feel like Hiro sounded a bit flat sometimes. There's a nice moment where Hiro reflects on losing Tadashi in a way that's similar to the way Sora's lost a lot of people over the course of the adventure. They work the heart elements in with the idea of, do robots have souls? They actually take an element from the film and turn it into the world's boss fight, which I'll get to later. And while this doesn't relate to the world's standalone plot at all, did Dark Riku just explain the time travel elements that played into Ansem possessing Riku in Kingdom Hearts 1 and actually make them surprisingly make sense? Now, gameplay. This is kind of like the Caribbean in that it's a mini open world. I give this world a 4 out of 5 for gameplay, and there's one main reason. They give you this huge sprawling metropolis to explore, but in the main storyline of the world, they don't give you much opportunities to explore it. The first Flash Tracer course in particular, it directs you on a predefined path via the rings, and the whole time I was doing it, I didn't even realize I was in San Fransokyo. I thought it was just in a self-contained virtual world. The other times, you're teleported directly to where the Heartless you need to fight are, or you don't have time to explore because the Big Hero 6 members are kind of all gonna die if you don't help them quickly. The Caribbean, in my opinion, did a much better job of integrating the exploration into your first visit to the world. Like I said, the game encourages you to take some time and explore. San Fransokyo doesn't do that, and as a result, by the time I finished the main plotline of this world, I had 3 of the world's treasure chests. That is the fewest number of treasure chests I've had upon my initial completion of any world in the series. I didn't even find the map on my first visit. For boss fight, I give this world a 4 out of 5. And this is another one where some people are going to be very angry that I didn't give it a 5. I'm not just rating the end boss of the world here. In fact, that's the one that drags it down a point. I love the Dark Cubes fight. It's one of the most interesting fights in the game to me. And it's not often that a world has 2 boss fights that both feel equally important. Then there's the actual end boss of the world, which a lot of people love the concept of, Baymax's original body possessed by the Heartless. It's a cool idea, and one that was shown off in trailers, but here's the problem I have with it. You spend the entire fight on Interceptor Wing. And in that state, you don't have a lot of options. I was hoping that the Interceptor Wing portion would only be half the fight, and there'd be an on-foot segment after that. That didn't happen. If there was an on-foot segment where you got to use all of Sora's abilities, which would be a perfect way to tie into that earlier cutscene, by the way, I would have given this a 5 out of 5, but as it stands, Interceptor Wing's lack of options made the fight feel kind of dull after a while. So those are my thoughts on all the Disney worlds of the game. You're probably wondering about my thoughts on the gameplay of some of the original worlds, especially the last ones. I'll just say that every single endgame boss gets a 5 out of 5 and leave it at that. So overall, my 2 obvious favourites are San Fransokyo and Toy Box. But I liked Arendelle a lot more than I expected to, apart from its story. And Kingdom of Corona was pretty good too. Looking back, the only world that I really felt meh on was Monstropolis. I don't know, there's just something about the design of that world that just wasn't all that memorable to me. I did like the fact that you got to explore the factory and see some of the iconic areas from the film, but it just felt a little bit small and cramped for the most part, and just not as memorable as some of the other worlds. But anyway, that's all I have to say about Kingdom Hearts 3. I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts, and I'll see you in whatever I do next.